Charlie Kirk leaned into the microphone, his voice sharpened with the sneer he had perfected over years of turning debates into gladiator fights. "You don't even understand the Constitution," he spat, jabbing his finger toward Jasmine Crockett as if his gesture alone could reduce her to silence. The room caught its breath. The words hung in the air like a slap, the kind that made everyone shift in their seats, waiting to see if she would crumble. For a split second, the scene seemed frozen. Kirk sat back, lips curled in that smirk of triumph, convinced he had landed the knockout blow. His supporters gave a scattered laugh, feeding his confidence. The lights above seemed harsher. The cameras zoomed in closer, every angle capturing the smug certainty on his face. In that instant, Kirk thought he had written the headline himself. Charlie Kirk humiliates Jasmine Crockett, but the silence that followed wasn't surrender. It was the silence of a storm gathering its force. Crockett's eyes locked onto him, steady and unblinking. Her hands rested calmly on the desk in front of her. No notes, no fluster, no sign of retreat. It was as if his insult had ricocheted off her, leaving only the echo ringing back into his own ears. The audience felt it before it happened. The subtle shift, the tightening in the air. Kirk had thrown his punch, but something told them the fight wasn't over. In fact, it hadn't even begun. A woman underestimated, ridiculed, and dismissed had just been challenged in front of the nation. And as the silence stretched, every second turned into anticipation. Kirk leaned back in his chair, clearly satisfied, his smirk widening with each heartbeat of quiet. But what he mistook for victory was actually suspense. Crockett's calm gaze wasn't the look of someone defeated. It was the gaze of someone about to strike with precision, someone who understood the true weight of timing. And then, just as Kirk's confidence began to harden into arrogance, the energy in the room shifted entirely. Crockett opened her mouth, her first words carrying the kind of power that didn't need volume to dominate. What she said next didn't just silence Kirk, it sent shockwaves across America. The debate wasn't held in some dimly lit back room, nor was it a casual town hall lost to the news cycle. It was prime time, broadcast across networks, streamed live to millions scrolling their feeds, clipped and reposted before the words even finished leaving the speakers' mouths. Every camera was locked in, every microphone hot, every reaction caught. This wasn't just a clash of ideas. It was a stage where reputations could rise or fall in an instant. Charlie Kirk knew how to work a room like this. He thrived on provocation, on the adrenaline of confrontation. His brand was built on spectacle. The raised eyebrow, the mocking laugh, the verbal dagger thrown not to invite dialogue, but to wound. Over the years, he had turned debates into theaters of humiliation, priding himself on cornering opponents until their frustration became his trophy. It was never really about substance, it was about dominance. And that night he came armed with the same playbook. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't supposed to be the opponent who rattled him, at least not in his mind. To him, she was easy prey, a freshman Democrat, a black woman in politics, someone he believed the crowd would dismiss before she even spoke. His supporters had painted her as unpolished, too fiery, too inexperienced to hold her ground against a seasoned provocateur. That was his first mistake, because Crockett had spent her career preparing for moments exactly like this. As a public defender, she had stood face to face with systems designed to break people down. As a legislator, she had endured dismissals and insults in committee rooms that would have silenced others. And through it all, she learned that dignity was more powerful than volume, and composure more lethal than rage. The stage that night was not an equal playing field. Kirk entered with the assumption of dominance, but Crockett entered with something he didn't: resilience forged in fire, and an unshakable belief in her purpose. The crowd didn't see it yet, but she was sitting there like a coiled spring, every ounce of restraint preparing her for the precise moment when restraint would no longer be needed. And make no mistake, the stakes of this confrontation were bigger than the two of them. In a country where debates often feel like shouting matches divorced from real life, this clash represented something visceral. Kirk stood as the face of ridicule, belittlement, and a politics that thrived on tearing down. Crockett stood as the embodiment of defiance, dignity, and the audacity of those who refused to be silenced. Every jab Kirk threw wasn't just personal. It carried the weight of history, the centuries of arrogance aimed at silencing voices like hers. And every second Crockett sat composed, watching, listening, letting him unravel. She wasn't just holding her own. She was rewriting the dynamic. The audience watching at home may not have realized it yet, but they were witnessing a collision between two Americas. One loud, arrogant, unyielding in its contempt. The other steady, resilient, and unwilling to be erased. Kirk thought he was playing a game of one-liners. But Crockett saw it differently. The insults he chose weren't just cheap shots. They revealed something darker. And Crockett saw it coming. What she did with that recognition would turn a debate into a defining moment. Not just for her career, but for the millions watching who saw themselves in her composure, her fire, and her refusal to bow. Charlie Kirk has always prided himself on being the disruptor, the voice that storms into polite conversation and detonates a bomb of provocation. To his loyal followers, he is a warrior, bold, brash, unafraid to say what others won't. To his critics, he is something else entirely, a provocateur addicted to outrage, someone who confuses cruelty with courage and mistreatment with truth-telling. Either way, he has built his entire persona on the spectacle of conflict. From college campuses to primetime interviews, Kirk has made his reputation by baiting opponents into frustration. He relishes the art of interruption, the smirk that accompanies a rhetorical jab, the clipped video posted online moments later, stripped of context but brimming with arrogance. For years, this strategy worked. It won him attention, followers, book deals, and an unshakable place in the machinery of political theater. His style wasn't just aggressive. It was deliberately demeaning. He knew that if he could make an opponent look flustered, he would look strong. But behind the bravado lies a glaring contradiction. Kirk speaks endlessly about patriotism, about his love of the Constitution, about American greatness. Yet, in practice, his rhetoric often reduces to division. Who belongs and who doesn't? Who deserves a voice and who should be silenced? It is a vision of America not as a shared home, but as a battlefield where power is hoarded, not shared. He insists he is defending freedom, even as he tramples on the dignity of those who challenge him. It's a contradiction his critics never miss. And on that stage, Jasmine Crockett was the living embodiment of it. A black woman rising in the halls of power, an unapologetic progressive, a voice that refused to shrink. To Kirk, dismantling her in front of cameras wasn't just another victory lap. It was a statement to his base. If he could humiliate Crockett, he could reinforce the narrative that voices like hers were illegitimate, laughable, unworthy of serious consideration. That was the arrogance fueling his words when he leaned into the mic that night. He wasn't debating Crockett. He was performing dominance. But arrogance carries its own kind of blindness. Kirk had grown so accustomed to opponents breaking under the pressure, so accustomed to controlling the stage with sheer volume and smugness, that he failed to see the cracks forming in his own performance. Because here's the truth about arrogance. It thrives on compliance. It feeds off silence, off the expectation that the insulted party will retreat, lash out rashly, or stumble under the weight of humiliation. Arrogance needs its target to fold in order to claim victory. But when the target doesn't fold, arrogance begins to look exactly like what it is: weakness in disguise. That night, as Kirk strutted in his chair, reveling in the chuckles of his supporters, his confidence blinded him to the danger he was walking into. He didn't see the stillness in Crockett's expression. He didn't hear the shift in the audience as their laughter gave way to unease. He didn't recognize that he had crossed from confidence into caricature, from sharp debater into bully on display. And that miscalculation mattered. Because the truth is, Kirk's entire persona is built on the illusion of control. He has never been strongest when confronted with facts, but when cornering his opponents into emotional outbursts. Against someone like Crockett, disciplined, unshaken, prepared, his playbook suddenly looked brittle. Still, in his mind, he was winning. He had fired off his insult, thrown down his gauntlet, and sat back with the arrogance of a man who believed the debate was already over. The cameras caught his smirk, his raised eyebrow, his body language brimming with smug certainty. To Kirk, this was just another clip destined for viral triumph. But arrogance is a dangerous drug, and Kirk was already overdosing. He mistook silence for submission, when in reality it was strategy. He mistook composure for weakness, when in reality it was strength. And he mistook the crowd's initial chuckles for consensus, when in reality the room was waiting, almost eager, to see if Crockett would deliver the kind of response that changes everything. Charlie Kirk had built his reputation on making others unravel. What he didn't realize, at least, not yet, was that his own unraveling had already begun, and it would take just one response from Jasmine Crockett to tear the illusion down completely. Jasmine Crockett did not arrive on that stage by accident, nor by favor, nor by the fragile luck of timing. Her presence was carved from years of struggle, sharpened in courtrooms and sealed through battles most people never saw. To understand why she didn't flinch under Charlie Kirk's insult, you have to understand the path that brought her there. A path that never rewarded silence, but demanded resilience. Long before she ever raised her voice in a congressional hearing or stood behind the seal of public office, Crockett was a defender of the voiceless. As a public defender in Texas, she faced a justice system tilted heavily against those who could least afford fairness. Day after day, she walked into courtrooms where her clients were presumed guilty before they even spoke. She stood across from prosecutors armed with limitless resources. And yet, with nothing but her conviction and her words, she fought to restore dignity to people the system had discarded. That kind of experience leaves an imprint. It teaches you that survival depends not on shouting the loudest, but on knowing exactly when and how to strike with precision. In those courtrooms, she faced hostility, sometimes overt, sometimes subtle. Judges who doubted her, opposing counsel who rolled their eyes, colleagues who underestimated her because she was young, because she was black, because she was a woman daring to demand respect. Every sneer, every dismissive smirk was its own rehearsal, for the moment she would sit across from someone like Charlie Kirk. But Crockett's story is not only one of defense, it is one of defiance. Raised with a deep belief in service, she learned early that her voice carried power, even when the world tried to muffle it. She pursued law not because it was easy, but because it was necessary, because someone had to stand up when silence was the safer choice. Her entry into politics was not ambition in the abstract. It was an extension of that same fight, to make sure people overlooked and underestimated could finally be seen, heard and defended on the largest stage of all. In the halls of Texas politics, she learned to navigate the double binds. Too quiet and you were invisible. Too bold and you were angry. Too prepared and you were showing off. Too human and you were unprofessional. But Crockett never bent herself to fit the molds set by others. Instead, she leaned into authenticity, wielding her sharp wit and unapologetic presence as weapons. She developed a cadence that cut through the noise, direct, fearless, and impossible to ignore. Her rise to Congress wasn't smooth. She endured smears, caricatures, and constant reminders that the political arena wasn't designed for people like her. Yet each attack only reinforced her purpose. To her, representation wasn't symbolic. It was survival. For every young black woman watching, every immigrant family looking for proof that the system could include them, Crockett's fight meant more than politics. It meant possibility. So when she sat at that debate table across from Charlie Kirk, she didn't sit as a rookie waiting for validation. She sat as a woman forged by fire, a lawyer who had stared down injustice, a politician who had weathered contempt, and a human being who understood that dignity is not granted, it is claimed. The irony was almost cinematic. Kirk, steeped in arrogance, believed he had the upper hand. He believed his years of orchestrated outrage and viral takedowns gave him an advantage. He saw Crockett not as an equal adversary, but as a prop in his performance, someone he could bulldoze for clout. But he underestimated something crucial. Crockett had faced down much worse in rooms far less forgiving, with far more at stake. To her, his insult was nothing new. It was only louder, broadcast through cameras instead of whispered in corridors. Her composure in that moment wasn't passive. It was intentional. It was the patience of someone who knows that storms don't rage forever, they eventually collapse under their own force. Her stillness, her calm stare, her refusal to flinch, all of it was the product of years learning how to weaponize silence, how to let arrogance burn itself out before delivering the strike. For viewers at home who knew her story, that silence carried weight. It was the silence of a woman who had been counted out before, yet refused to vanish. It was the silence of communities who had been silenced for generations, waiting for someone to turn restraint into a rallying cry. Charlie Kirk didn't see it. He couldn't. He mistook her silence for weakness because he had never learned what it meant to endure. He had never been forced to sit in rooms where every word was measured against your identity, where your very presence was a protest. But Jasmine Crockett had lived it, and that night, she was ready to channel every ounce of that lived experience into one devastating reply. Her journey wasn't about the spotlight, it was about the people who never had one. And in facing Kirk, she wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for them too. The stage was set. The arrogance of Kirk versus the resilience of Crockett. Two legacies colliding in front of millions. He thought he had already won, but she was about to prove that dignity, when wielded with precision, doesn't just survive arrogance, it obliterates it. And in the very next breath, the battle would escalate to a breaking point. The silence that followed Kirk's insult was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of suspense. Every camera, every spectator, every viewer at home leaned forward, waiting to see if Jasmine Crockett would take the bait, snap back, or retreat into uneasy laughter. Instead, she sat still, eyes fixed on Kirk, her expression steady, her body language calm. That silence itself began to rattle him, though he masked it with another smirk. Sensing an opportunity to press harder, Kirk leaned in again. "This is why people don't take you seriously," he sneered, his voice rising just enough to fill the auditorium. "You care more about woke nonsense than about the country." He let the word woke hang in the air like poison, a word his base had weaponized into shorthand for everything they despised. His supporters in the crowd chuckled, reassured by the predictability of his script, but the rest of the room didn't laugh. They had heard this act before, seen this performance play out. For the first time it felt tired, overplayed. Still, Kirk didn't notice. He doubled down, convinced he was in control. "The American people are sick of this kind of representation," he barked. "Sick of politicians like you who don't even understand the basics of freedom." The escalation was textbook Kirk. Volume as a weapon, interruption as dominance, insult as strategy. He pounded the table lightly for emphasis, gesturing wildly, his voice almost drowning out the moderators who tried to maintain order. But as his attacks grew louder, his arguments grew thinner, less grounded in substance and more dependent on ridicule. Crockett, however, remained unshaken. She tilted her head slightly as if studying him, her expression unreadable but deliberate. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. And in that restraint, the dynamic of the debate began to shift. The audience noticed. Viewers at home noticed. Even Kirk, beneath his bluster, began to sense it. His energy was escalating, but hers was only gathering. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Each insult Kirk hurled was another gust of wind against a wall that refused to budge. Each jab, instead of landing, seemed to ricochet back into the empty air between them. The more he flailed, the more Crockett's composure looked like strength. And then came the breaking point. Kirk, his voice now strained, delivered what he thought would be the fatal blow. "You don't deserve to be here. People like you are ruining America." The words fell with a thud, uglier than anything he had said before. Gasps rippled through the room. Even some of his own supporters shifted uncomfortably, sensing he had crossed into dangerous territory. The insult wasn't just political anymore. It was personal, heavy with centuries of exclusion, dismissiveness, and arrogance. The moderators tried to intervene, but it was too late. The damage was done and the stage was set. The escalation had reached its peak and all eyes turned to Crockett. She straightened in her chair, finally moving after what felt like an eternity of stillness. The energy shifted instantly. The silence wasn't suspense anymore. It was anticipation. Everyone in the room, and millions watching across the country, knew that the moment had come. She was about to respond. And not with anger, not with noise, but with the kind of precision that could slice through Kirk's wall of arrogance like glass. The insults had piled high. The arrogance had swelled to its peak, and the audience was bracing themselves for what came next. And then, in a pause so sharp you could hear the room breathe, Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth. When Jasmine Crockett finally spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried more weight than all of Kirk's shouting combined. It was calm, deliberate, and sharpened like a blade. "You think I don't deserve to be here?" She began, each syllable clipped with clarity. "Let me remind you, Congressman, that the only reason you even are here is because this system rewards bluster over substance," the crowd murmured, a low ripple of shock and satisfaction, as Crockett's words cut through the noise. Kirk leaned back in his chair, smirk faltering just slightly, as if realizing he had just walked into the very trap she had been setting in her silence. She didn't give him room to breathe. "You stand here, chest puffed out, shouting down anyone who doesn't fit into your narrow vision of America. And yet, with all that noise, with all that arrogance, you still can't disguise the truth. You're afraid. Afraid of women like me. Afraid of immigrants. Afraid of change. Afraid of the America that's actually coming." The energy in the room shifted again. This time it wasn't tension but eruption. Applause broke out, quick and sharp, though the moderators tried to tamp it down. But Crockett wasn't performing for permission. She pressed forward, eyes locked on Kirk like a predator circling its prey. "You call me unfit? You call me unworthy? Let's talk about unworthy. Let's talk about a man who has built his career on bullying college students, on pandering to fear, on selling outrage like it's candy to people who deserve better." She leaned forward now, her voice still steady but gaining momentum. "You think you're tough because you shout. But real strength is shown in restraint. Real strength is knowing your history, carrying your people, and refusing to back down when men like you tell us to sit quietly and be grateful." Kirk tried to interject, waving his hand dismissively, but Crockett's words landed faster than his interruptions. "You don't intimidate me," she fired back without even glancing at him, "because I've faced worse than you. My ancestors faced worse than you. And every time men like you tried to silence women like me, we got louder, we got stronger, and we kept moving forward." The audience roared, not just applause this time, but cheers. Something visceral was happening. Crockett wasn't simply rebutting Kirk's insult. She was embodying a collective resistance that stretched far beyond the stage. Each word she delivered felt less like a debate response and more like a declaration, one that transcended the room and reached directly into the hearts of those watching across the country. Her cadence grew rhythmic, almost sermon-like. "You don't get to decide who belongs in America. You don't get to dictate who is worthy, because this country doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the people who built it, the people who bled for it, the people who keep pushing it to live up to its promise." For the first time that evening, Kirk was silent. His trademark interruptions, the chuckles, the scoffs, the attempts to rattle his opponent, fell away. He sat frozen, jaw tight, eyes darting to the moderators as if begging them to intervene. But they couldn't, not now. The momentum was unstoppable. Crockett leaned back slightly, allowing a small smile to flicker across her face. It wasn't smugness. It was certainty. She knew the moment had shifted irrevocably. "You thought you could define me with an insult," she said softly, the volume dropping but the intensity rising. "But all you did was reveal yourself. And I promise you this, history will not remember your shouting. It will remember my answer." The crowd exploded. Applause thundered across the room, spilling over the attempts to restore order. Viewers at home flooded social media with clips, captions, and hashtags. In real time, Crockett's response became a rallying cry, and then she delivered the final strike, the true mic drop. Her voice steadied once more, as if channeling every ounce of generational weight into one last blow. "You said I don't deserve to be here, but look around, Mr. Kirk, I am here, and no amount of your noise can change that fact. The future you fear, it's already standing in front of you." She let the words hang in the air, then folded her hands, signaling she was done. Not just done with Kirk, but done with the entire notion that his kind of politics could ever define her. The silence after her statement wasn't the awkward pause of tension. It was reverence. The kind of silence that follows when something undeniable has been spoken, when a truth too powerful to dismiss has been laid bare. Kirk shuffled in his seat, clearly itching to recover, to claw back some semblance of control. But nothing he said from that point forward mattered. His insults had escalated into desperation, and Crockett's clapback had demolished him in a single stroke. The debate moved on, but the damage was irreversible. Crockett had not only silenced Kirk, she had transformed the entire atmosphere. She had reminded the audience and the nation that arrogance can be loud, but dignity can be louder. What she had just done wasn't a response. It was a reckoning. And as Kirk sat there, stewing in the ruins of his own outburst, everyone in that room understood the truth. His attack had backfired spectacularly. He hadn't diminished Crockett. He had crowned her. The nation would be talking about this night for years. Clips would be replayed, quotes would be etched into headlines, and young people across America, immigrants, women, people of color, would see themselves in her strength. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just win the exchange. She rewrote the terms of the fight, and Kirk, he became the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when arrogance meets unshakable resolve. But this was only the beginning. The resonance of that moment stretched far beyond the walls of the auditorium, far beyond the glare of stage lights. What happened next would show just how powerful her words truly were. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words landed, the air in the auditorium shifted permanently. It was no longer just a debate stage. It was a battlefield, and Crockett had emerged as the undisputed victor. Kirk sat rigid, pretending to scribble notes, his face betraying a mix of irritation and disbelief. But the audience? They couldn't contain themselves. Applause thundered through the hall, claps breaking into chants, murmurs swelling into something almost electric. Moderators pleaded for order, but it was too late. The momentum had escaped the room and was already racing into the digital bloodstream of America. Within seconds, phones shot up, screens glowing as people captured the exchange. Clips were uploaded in real time. The hashtags began instantly. Crockett clapback, Kirk sit down Kirk, dignity wins. By the time Kirk tried to stammer his way back into the discussion, he was already being memed into oblivion online. One side-by-side video compared his sneer with Crockett's calm retort, captioned, "This is what real strength looks like." But the shockwaves weren't confined to humor. They struck something deeper. Across social media, immigrant families, young women, activists, and everyday citizens began sharing their own stories under Crockett's name. "I felt seen tonight," one post read. Another went viral. "Jasmine Crockett just spoke for every person who's ever been told they don't belong." Commentators were quick to seize on the moment. Clips aired on late-night shows, with comedians replaying Kirk's failed attack, pausing for effect, and letting Crockett's rebuttal drop like a bomb. Audiences howled with laughter at Kirk's shrinking smirk. But when Crockett's words echoed, "The future you fear, it's already standing in front of you," the laughter gave way to applause. Even in comedy, her line carried reverence. Meanwhile, political analysts filled the airwaves. On one network, a pundit tried to defend Kirk, but the host interrupted. "Be honest, she destroyed him." That wasn't a rebuttal. It was history. Across rival channels, even those hesitant to give Crockett airtime admitted she had delivered the kind of viral knockout that campaigns dream of. And yet, what made the shockwaves so potent wasn't just the headlines. It was the ripple effect among ordinary people. Teachers shared Crockett's clip with their students as an example of composure under fire. Community leaders quoted her words at local rallies. Young voters began remixing her lines into TikToks, splicing her face over iconic cinematic moments, from courtroom dramas to superhero scenes. In each version, Crockett wasn't just a politician anymore. She was a symbol. Charlie Kirk, on the other hand, became a punchline. Memes exaggerated his sneer into caricature, while others labeled him the poster boy for fragility. His attempt at dominance had backfired so spectacularly that even his own allies struggled to defend him without looking out of touch. Silence spread across his camp. Every word they might offer risked amplifying Crockett's triumph further. And beyond the comedy, the real story crystallized. Kirk's attack had revealed the very insecurities Crockett exposed. His bluster wasn't strength. It was fear masquerading as power. Crockett's calm dismantling had pulled the mask off, and America had seen it happen in real time. By dawn the next morning, Crockett's face was splashed across front pages, her words printed in bold. Editorials described the clash not as a debate moment, but as a cultural turning point. "A masterclass in dignity under fire," one headline read. Another, "Crockett redefines what it means to belong." The shockwaves even reached beyond politics. Celebrities tweeted their support, athletes quoted her line about the future, and musicians began referencing her speech and lyrics. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was an anthem, a reset button for the narrative about who gets to stand tall in America. And through it all, Crockett remained composed. No gloating, no victory lap. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she had spoken her truth, and the world had chosen to listen. What had started as Kirk's sneer had become a national reckoning. And as the headlines continued, one question lingered. If a single moment on stage could unleash this kind of tidal wave, what else was Jasmine Crockett capable of? The country was about to find out. When the dust settled, when the applause dimmed and the social media frenzy slowed into reflection, one truth remained clear. Jasmine Crockett had not just defended herself. She had spoken to the very soul of America. Her words reached beyond Charlie Kirk's sneer, beyond the partisan divide of that night. They carried the weight of history, the story of those who had been told time and again that they didn't belong, yet kept building, kept striving, kept proving their worth through resilience. Crockett's clapback became more than a viral moment. It became a parable of dignity rising over arrogance. In the days that followed, her response was replayed in living rooms and classrooms. Families sat together and nodded as she declared that real strength comes not from shouting, but from carrying your people. Teachers reminded students that when faced with ignorance, composure could be the most devastating weapon. For many, especially immigrants and people of color, it felt like validation. Their quiet endurance, their struggles, their sacrifices were not invisible. The lesson was not simply that arrogance can be defeated. It was that arrogance always defeats itself. Kirk's sneer, his attempt to belittle, was the spark that ignited Crockett's fire. In trying to diminish her, he revealed the fragility of his own platform. In trying to define her, he ended up defining himself, and not in the way he intended. Crockett's calm dismantling stood as proof that dignity doesn't just survive in the face of insult. It transforms insult into power. It reshapes the battlefield. It reminds us that the loudest voice is not always the strongest, and that the truest form of courage is rooted in clarity, not chaos. The moral was universal. Belonging is not granted by those who shout the loudest or by those who cling to outdated visions of power. Belonging is earned through contribution, through service, through the quiet resolve to stand firm in the face of ridicule. Crockett embodied that truth, and in doing so, she gave millions a reflection of themselves on that stage. And yet, her words carried a warning too. They reminded the nation that fear disguised as bravado is still dangerous. Kirk's attack wasn't just about one woman. It represented a broader effort to gatekeep Americanness, to intimidate those who challenge old hierarchies. Crockett's stand showed that such fear can be met and defeated, but only if more people are willing to confront it with the same unshakable resolve. In the end, the clash was not about Kirk or even Crockett alone. It was about us, about the America we choose to build. Do we amplify the voices of fear, or do we honor the voices of dignity? Do we cling to the arrogance of exclusion, or do we rise with the strength of inclusion? As Crockett herself had said, the future isn't something to fear. It is already here, already standing in front of us, embodied in the diversity, resilience, and courage of people who refuse to be silenced. Her answer that night reminded America of what has always been true. Progress may be resisted, but it cannot be denied. And so the moral crystallized, echoing long after the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling. Dignity does not just win debates, it defines history. The night Charlie Kirk tried to belittle Jasmine Crockett, he thought he was landing a blow that would define her. Instead, it defined him. And it defined a moment in history that no one watching will forget. Crockett's clapback wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a declaration, a reminder that America belongs not to those who shout the loudest, but to those who stand the tallest when tested. This wasn't just about Kirk versus Crockett. It was about something larger, the struggle over who gets to claim America, who gets to speak for it, who gets to embody its promise. And in that moment it was clear, arrogance crumbled while dignity endured. If you felt that fire, if you saw yourself in her strength, then you know this is more than a viral clip. It's a call to action. Share this story. Talk about it.
Carry it with you.
Because what happened on that stage wasn't entertainment. It was empowerment. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in this fight for dignity and truth. Join a community that refuses to be silenced, that refuses to bow to arrogance, and that insists on building an America where everyone belongs. Because in the end, it's not just about who wins the debate. It's about who defines the future. And if Jasmine Crockett's words proved anything, it's that the future doesn't belong to fear. It belongs to us.